What's up, guys? Welcome into Bear Report Live, brought to you by the Bear Report. It's Usayd, Koshul, and Andrew Freeman here. You can follow us on Twitter at Usayd, Koshul, and at AJ Freeman25. Be sure to follow Bear Report on Twitter and Facebook at Bear Report Scout at Bear Report. Check out the Picks for Polls podcast as well. We broke down everything related to the 2022 NFL Draft. It's Friday night, about 10:30 p.m. Central Time that we're recording this. We got the New York Jets on the clock right now. They are wrapping up the third round as we speak. About 3 or 4 more picks to go before we look ahead to day 3 as well. The Bears showing the action on Friday night, and I think, Andrew, let's just get right into it because it was super polarizing. I think all 3 of the Bears selections. You had people who loved and hated the Kyler Gordon selection. The same went for Jaquan Brisker in round 2 at 48th overall. And then third round, 71st overall with Felix Jones Jr. is, I know, the one that you and I are most excited to just tear this organization apart for us. But, polarizing night overall. But how you doing? And then what were your thoughts on the way that the Bears board fell tonight?
Well, if you want to know how I'm doing here, I'm drinking. This is called Big Brother Hard Root Beer. I'm at that point in my alcohol storage for my fridge right now. So this is where I'm at. And I just, for some reason, I guess the draft picks gave me the urge to crack open this. But I mean, if that's any indication of how I'm doing tonight, definitely a mix of emotions. To be quite clear here, and this, man, it's tough because I think when you look at the second round picks, obviously we'll delve deeper into it, and we can kind of just go pick by pick here, I guess. But it's weird because I like the players in the second round that the Bears got. The strategy is what I'm kind of struggling to comprehend here. I guess not struggling to comprehend because I kind of have a feeling of what they're trying to do, and I get it. I just really vehemently disagree with it. And then the third round pick, Felix Jones Jr. We can get to that one later on here because that was a head scratcher for me as well. And then, I was really looking forward to tonight. Obviously, Bears not having a first round pick, a lot of anticipation to see what Ryan Poles would do in his first draft here. And so far, I'm pretty underwhelmed to be quite honest here. So, Usayd, if you want to go into this thing here and we just kick this off, do you want to start, I guess, with a Kyler Gordon pick here and just go pick by pick?
Yeah, absolutely. And, the way we're going to do this is we're going to talk about the Bears selections, but then just get into our other general thoughts from around the league and kind of what we saw, because I've got the draft playing on my TV right now as we speak. But look, you look at Kyler Gordon, and I think something needs to be said here because we knew that cornerback was a significant need for the Bears, and we highlighted this throughout the offseason and said, if you were going to rank the Bears' needs, it's going to go wide receiver and offensive line. Those were interchangeable at 1 and 2. And then cornerback was going to be number 3, no matter what the situation and circumstances were. The Bears could have sat on their hands and given Thomas Graham Jr. a shot to start opposite Jalen Johnson, knowing that he is a big physical cornerback. But ultimately, I think you look at it and Kyler Gordon just makes sense from a scheme perspective. And again, if you've got thoughts and stuff too, go ahead and chime in. We'll project some of them up on screen. But the point is Kyler Gordon, I think, is just a freak athlete. He plays with really good long speed, really good footwork, really fluid at the hips, and he's just a solid cover corner in general. And then I think his confidence, and I just wrote about this on the Bear Report website as an article, go check that out. His confidence, I think, is the biggest aspect of his game. So this is a player that a lot of people, ourselves included, had first round grades on, but ultimately he fell to the second round simply because there was a run on wide receivers and offensive linemen in the middle part of the first round, which pushed him out of round 1. So Gordon, I think, is going to be a really good player, both in the short term and long term for the Bears. And he's someone that's going to give the Chicago Bears a legitimate building block and a legitimate core piece next to Jalen Johnson. So the Bears cornerbacks are now set for the next couple seasons. And that's really positive because, again, you're in a pass happy league, and we're seeing now that one cornerback is great, but you need to have two really good cornerbacks who play at a high level that have traits such as size, speed, athleticism, strength, coverage ability, the ability to shift with ease playing from inside to outside to be able to have a long career in this league.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, I mean, we can certainly, there are some things to question about the Bears draft so far, and we'll get into that as we go. But I think going cornerback here with Kyler Gordon does make some sense from a big picture viewpoint here, because cornerback, it is a valuable position. It's one of those top five. We look at quarterback, offensive tackle, pass rusher, cornerback, wide receiver. Those are kind of the five positions you want to be really strong at here. The Bears, they've been pretty weak at that spot the last couple of years. Obviously, Jalen Johnson, he's probably the one solidified guy who's going to be here long term for you. They signed Tavon Young? Yeah, Tavon Young to be their slot guy in free agency on kind of like a 1 year minimum type of contract, but no one really else at that other outside spot. And Kyle Gordon, he can fill that really well. I actually, in a vacuum here, I do like the value of getting Kyler Gordon at this spot. I think he's a really good player. He's a great athlete. I know he didn't run as fast as I thought he would at his combine and pro day, whatever. But everywhere else, like, this guy is a phenomenal athlete. He's got great agility. He's got great explosiveness. He's got pretty good size for the position. Like you kind of said, he has versatility to play both in the slot and the outside. So I think he's primarily going to play on the outside and even for this defense, but we'll see where they end up putting him. So I actually don't mind this pick as much. And when the pick happened, I was like, okay, I would have done something different there. Like, I would have tried to trade down because I felt like, at that spot, they were in a pretty good spot there to move down the draft board a little bit and, still get a wide receiver, still get an offensive lineman, and pick up some extra draft capital, or even, if they wanted to address defense, even still address defense by trading down. So that's the first thing I would have done. And obviously offense, I would have much preferred they do an offense, and we'll get into why that's the case as we go forward into this live stream here. But overall, it's tough to hate this pick in particular, because in a vacuum, it is a really good pick. It fills a position in need. He's a really talented player with a lot of upside, and they got a good value on him. I thought Kyler Gordon was a borderline first round to early second round talent, so that is not bad whatsoever. But again, it kind of goes into this general strategy of the Bears addressing defense over offense, which I think has kind of been a theme of this offseason so far. And I mean, that kind of goes into their next second round pick, obviously, if you want to get into the details there, because this is where things really start to, kind of go off the rails for me in terms of my sense of emotions for this draft in general.
Yeah, look, safety's never really been one of those positions that you looked at and you said, okay, the Bears absolutely have to address this safety position. And Jaquan Brisker from Penn State, to give people an idea, I mean, we had two safeties drafted in round one, I believe. Jaquan Brisker, I think, was the third guy off the board. I understand why people think he's such a valuable asset here. I mean, he's such a good pick because you see the athleticism shine up on tape. You see qualities such as versatility, toughness. There are times where, he is the growth over the last couple of years is he's kind of gone from hesitant to really instinctive. So you look at him and you say, okay, this is a player that's clearly going, has all the modern traits needed to play in Matt Eberflus's defense. I know that he did play through injuries at times in 2021, some nagging injuries, but those weren't ever necessarily looked at as red flags. He's played up in the box. He's played really all over the place. Okay. So that's what I like about Jaquan Brisker. Now, there are times where the angles he takes are a bit inconsistent, which leads to him being over aggressive, missing tackles. Confidence is not an issue at all, but I really think with Brisker overall, the game slowed down with him. Or the game slowed down for him in 2021. He needs to kind of get better as a tackler, but this is the reason it's such a polarizing pick for me is because like I said, safety wasn't necessarily a need, and I don't think there should have even been a reason for the Bears to go defense in round 2, especially knowing that there were some of the wide receivers like Sky Moore, like a George Pickens, such as an Alec Pierce, that were on the board. And so ultimately, this is something that you look at and you say, okay, the Bears made the second selection to kind of go ahead and please Matt Eberflus, if we're going to be honest.
Oh, it 100% feels like this is 100% authored by Eberflus, and his influence on this organization is what these two picks feel like. And, it's a weird situation because I think with both of these draft picks, it's, I like the players and I think the Bears got good value on them, but that conversation is different from the overall strategy that they're going here in terms of addressing things in this draft. So for Brisker, in his case, I think he's a good fit for what Eberflus is looking at that safety position. I mean, he's a physical player. He's got good ball skills. He's perfect at working down in the box there. He can kind of come up from that too high alignment and work down into the first 10 to 15 yards from the line of scrimmage. He kind of pairs well with an Eddie Jackson, who is more of that free safety type who can go single high and go sideline to sideline deep over the middle of the field there. So in terms of that aspect of things, I get it. But I mean, it's kind of like you said, at the same time, it does feel like, this is Eberflus trying to build his defense here rather than, the Bears having an overarching strategy to build things out to get this team to where it needs to go. And where this team needs to go is to get some damn help on this offense, man, because, look, I'm not saying they had to, stick here and draft a wide receiver or reach for a guy that they maybe didn't like. I'm not saying that. But again, I have a hard time seeing this as them just going purely best player available here because, I mean, as we'll see in the third round, I don't think, these guys are necessarily the best players available on the board for them to draft. And, when you get into the overall discussion of what needs to happen this offseason, one, obviously establishing a culture is huge for this front office and this team right now because it's a new regime. They want to get their guys in here and they want to figure out who's going to be the long-term building blocks for this team going forward. And I get that. But the main important thing here is to find out what you have in Justin Fields, or at the very least put him in a position to succeed and hope that he can continue to flourish before our very eyes as that franchise quarterback. And I just get the feeling that you look at these moves here, I don't think you're necessarily doing that. And, let's say Jaquan Brisker is your best player available. Okay. And look, I mean, the secondary, you look at it right now for the Bears, it's looking pretty solid on paper here. You have Jalen Johnson, you have Kyler Gordon, you have Walker and Thomas Graham, I think, competing for that slot position, which, I think that gives you 4 solid corners right there. And then the safety spot, you got Eddie Jackson, you got Dan Cruikshank, who they just drafted. They get who they just signed this free agency. You got Brisker here, who they just drafted. And then DHC is back on a 1-year flyer deal. So on paper, the secondary looks pretty dang solid right now going forward. And I think that's what a lot of Bears fans are pointing out who are defending these selections here. They're saying, well, look, our secondary was a weakness for us last year. Everyone was complaining about how bad the secondary was and how, Pace neglected the secondary last season. Now we've made these moves to fix the secondary. And it's like, okay, cool. I get it. But at the same time, I don't care about the secondary when the offensive depth chart is as horrid as it is right now. I mean, let's just go down the starters here, or projected starters for the Bears offense right now. At left tackle, you got Larry Borum, who's a second-year, fifth-round pick who, yeah, he played well for a fifth-round pick last year, but he still wasn't very good. At left guard, you got Cody White, who's on a big, massive contract, coming off his worst season as a pro. And I think he's over 30 years old right now. So he's getting up there in age as we speak as well. At center, you bring in Lucas Patrick, who, was the Packers' sixth man, basically. Their swing interior offensive lineman for them the last couple of years. So he wasn't even a full-time start for the Packers, although he's pretty solid when he was, given opportunities to start. He was pretty good for them the last couple of years. I'm not saying he was a bad signing by any means. I think he's certainly capable in the role of center. But at right guard, they're starting Sam Mustipher, it looks like, in their early training camp and their early OTAs, I should say, right now, which isn't very good. And then right tackle, Tevin Jenkins, who didn't play, he barely played last year because he was dealing with a back injury all year. And while I love that he's back at right tackle, it seems right now, and I think Tevin Jenkins was an awesome prospect coming out, the fact remains that he hasn't shown anything in the NFL that has given us any, reason for optimism that this guy can be a stud right tackle. I think he can't get there. I love Tevin Jenkins, don't get me wrong, but there are still question marks there. You know what I mean? Running back, I think you feel pretty good about what you have there, to be honest. So I'm not going to go down the depth chart, but I mean, tight end, you basically got Cole Kmet, who's just here because he was, from Notre Dame and was a local kid from Arlington Heights. That's pretty much why he's here. He's your starting tight end, and they brought in a bunch of other dudes who are basically the same players as Cole Kmet. So that's fun, I guess. At wide receiver, you got Darnell Mooney, who's good. I think option here with Justin Fields in terms of the play styles there, the skill set matching there. But I think all the hype about him being this number one wide receiver, I think is a little bit overblown right now. I think he's a solid number two in a good offense, and he'll have to prove himself to be that number one guy. I think moving forward, I don't think it's a given that he's this number one, game changing wide receiver you can build a passing game around. It's unproven at this point. You bring in Byron Pringle, who just got into some off field issues already before he's even played a snap with the football team, which is fun. And then after that, I mean, who we going to be starting there? David Moore as a third wide receiver, Equinemius St. Brown. Give me a break, man. I mean, this roster is putrid on the offensive side of the ball. Like, can you think of a worse offensive unit right now than the Bears? I mean, I'm struggling to think of any. Maybe the Seattle Seahawks after trading away Russell Wilson. I mean, they still have DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett there. So, I mean, they still got some solid players to build around there. I mean, their offensive line isn't very good, but they drafted 2 offensive tackles in this draft. I mean, so they recognized that their offense sucked, and they actually went about fixing it. Houston Texans, maybe. Like, I'm struggling here because it just made too much sense because you trade away Khalil Mack, which is basically saying that, okay, nobody's safe on this roster. This is a new regime. We're going to build things differently here. And then they basically just go to building this team like it's the new revamped era of the Lovie Smith days, where we're going to get, this cover 2 guy in here, with the hits mentality, hustle to the ball on defense. We're going to give him his defensive guys on day 2. And then as we get to the 3rd round pick here, get him a nice kick returner in the 3rd round. Okay, fine. I guess that's a good segue to get into the 3rd round pick here if you want to break down Felix Jones here, Usayd.
Yeah, well, first I want to, you mentioned a lot there, and I do want to talk about this, is that, look, I said this a couple of weeks ago, and I know you can attest to it on all the Picks for Polls podcasts that we did, because we've done like 15 or 20 for this draft season alone. And one of the things I said was, as soon as Khalil Mack was traded, hey, it's a damn gutsy move when you trade away the best player on your roster. And it's not like they got great value for him. It's pretty much just chump change, a 6th round pick, a 2nd round pick, and then a $70 million dump. And I know Bears fans are like, well, look at all the money we got next year. Yeah, the money you have next year is not the result of having a roster that's filled with young talent. It's a result of having a roster that does not have like 53 players presently under contract or even the full 90. The Bears are going to have more free agents next year because there's more money than just Khalil Mack that's coming off the books. And you dump this pass rusher for basically a 2nd and 6th round pick. And what do? You turn right back around. You basically tell the fan base, yeah, we wanted to go ahead and use this money to
still build defense.
Invest. Exactly. You're basically saying that, and people don't understand that this is now a league that's driven by 2 things that I have to repeat every week because the message doesn't get through to the fan base. It's elite quarterback play, and it is elite offenses. And elite offenses are built on elite playmakers as well as elite quarterbacks. So if your offense doesn't have speed, explosiveness, if it does not have 2-3 good wide receivers, 2 good tight ends, a really dynamic running game, a great offensive line, your offense is going to struggle no matter what. And so unfortunately, in Chicago, it's like everything that's happened this offseason and that should have happened this offseason should have been predicated on, hey, what exactly is best for Justin Fields. Not best for the defense, not best for Matt Eberflus. What's best for Justin Fields because he's the guy moving forward. And the big thing that no one seems to understand is that Ryan Poles and Matt Eberflus are extremely lucky, and they're extremely lucky because they are walking into a situation where a highly touted and talented quarterback prospect was already in place. Like, look at the other 9 teams that hired head coaches this offseason. Which of those teams have a prospect with the upside that Justin Fields has? And a lot of Fields' struggles last year were more so just the terrible offense around him. It wasn't even Justin Fields himself. So, is there growth for Fields? Yeah. But did the Bears do enough through 2 days of the NFL draft? Absolutely not. So when we talk about a guy like a Felix Jones here, I mean, it's another super polarizing pick. And why? Because you could have taken George Pickens despite his off-field concerns at 48 overall. Sky Moore was there, who went to the Kansas City Chiefs towards the end of round 2. And again, the only reason the Chiefs selected Sky Moore is because, look, they want to add to that wide receiver group, even though they traded away Tyreek Hill. They say, hey, we know we have McCole Hardman, but we're going to add more and more speed because this is what our quarterback does best. And then Alec Pierce went off the board to Cincinnati. So you had Pickens 52, I believe Pierce 53, Sky Moore 54, and then here the Bears go selecting Felix Jones Jr., a player who, by the way, most major media outlets had ranked as, a late 4th, early 5th, definitely a 6th round pick. Felix Jones is number one. Let's get this straight. He's 25 years old. Yeah, he's remained relatively healthy, but he's one of the older players in this draft class. I think he's a super senior or might even be a redshirt senior. But the reason it's such a polarizing pick is because there were players like a David Bell, a Romeo Dobbs from Nevada. You had Jalen Tolbert as well from Southern Alabama, I believe, that were on the board that would have made more sense than Felix Jones Jr. So is there some upside there for a 25-year-old wide receiver? Yeah, whose, again, main role has been on special teams as well as being a situational player or just a starter for Tennessee. Yeah. But then at the end of the day, I mean, Felix Jones should not have been anyone's first choice at wide receiver. Certainly should not have been Ryan Poles' first choice. Now, I hate the selection because, look, you give props to these guys for trying to get it right by selecting a wide receiver. But where the Bears messed up was because they selected a wide receiver in round 3. Now, had this been the 5th or 6th round and the Bears took Felix Jones, then I would have said, okay, cool. You know what? This makes sense as a low risk, high reward, but not something like a 3rd round pick, which again is still in this draft, considering the depth that there is at certain positions. Round 3 still a premium pick.
Yeah, it's kind of like the opposite of what we had with the first 2 selections, where the first 2 selections, like, I like the players, I like the value got them at. I just disagree with the strategy of building defense first. Like, that's totally fine. But like this one, it's the opposite. It's the worst kind of bad pick, I think, where they're addressing the right position here, right, at wide receiver, but it's just a total reach right there. And this is where this whole best player available thing that I keep on seeing used as an excuse for these draft picks right now just makes no sense to me, because Felix Jones Jr., I don't care how you slice it, he's not the best player available here at the 71st overall selection. I look at his background as a player. When I was looking at him as a player, I saw him as a day 3, 5th round guy as well, because you look at him again, 25 years old. He's an older prospect, and where you can oppose that with a guy like, let's say, like, for instance, Bernard Raymond, 25 years old prospect, but there's a reason for that. He was new to football growing up, and he was also transitioning from tight end to offensive tackle over the last couple of years. So there's a reason why he's an older prospect at this point, because he's new to the game. He adjusts to a new position in college, and he really only had 2 years to start at that position. Whereas Felix Jones, he's been in college, I think, for 6 years, I think. And, the fact that this is a guy who has 4.3 speed, and you can't get a guy who has 4.3 speed on the football field for like 5 years, and just all of a sudden in the 6th year, he somehow becomes this big time playmaker. All of a sudden, like, there's a disconnect there in terms of, like, how could this guy not get on the field sooner if he's got all this juice and athletic ability and this explosiveness to his game? You look at his athletic profile. I mean, yeah, he has the 4.3 40 speed, but the agilities are below average, or at least not doesn't really stand out. The explosiveness doesn't really stand out. So it's a weird athletic profile that he has here. Now he's got, there are some things to like about him. Again, I recognize that the return ability is a really nice plus. I think, if you're looking for that special teams value, he definitely adds that. And there was, I think, I forgot, my name's, I'm blanking on the name here for the scout for the Bears, who's kind of, I think, scouted Jones for the Bears here. But he mentioned how Somerville, yeah. He kind of mentioned how the special teams coordinator, was pounding the table for this guy, and that Luke Getsky likes him too. So let's not ignore that factor as well. That Luke Getsky, he is excited about Felix Jones, and he really wanted to get this guy in the building here. So take that for what it is. I just, if you want a wide receiver with speed, there were so many guys on the board here I think you could have gone with. Like Calvin Austin, I feel like he's still on the board for whatever reason. I think teams are getting scared off by his size concern, which is probably why he's dropping to day 3 right now. But I felt like Calvin Austin was a better prospect than Felix Jones, like a much better all-around athlete. When you look at, his explosiveness, his agility, his make-your-miss ability in the open field. Like I liked Calvin Austin a whole lot more than Felix Jones as a prospect. And then if you're looking for a true, like actual wide receiver here, not just a gadget guy, Danny Gray was on the board as well. He ran a 4.3 40 as well out of SMU, and this guy can run a complete route tree as well. Like this guy is really good. Danny Gray, like he was one of my sleepers in this draft, and again, still on the board as well. But like I felt like both of those guys, like Jalen Tolbert was still on the board. Is kind of like a true outside wide receiver. Guys that just much better than Felix Jones that are on the board right now. And there are still guys at other positions, like at offensive line. Bernard Raymond was right there. Again, I bring up, Bernard Raymond, older prospect as well, but it's kind of a different thing because this is a guy who's new to the game, who's, quickly developing throughout his college career. Like he's shown like a very fast development track, whereas Felix Jones, couldn't get on the field for a long while as a great athlete like that. So, it's just, I don't know, man. It just doesn't sit right with me at all for that pick. And it's just frustrating because, again, I go back to this overall philosophy that the Bears have had here under this new regime for this offseason. And you look at the first day of free agency, they go out and they try to sign Larry Ogunjobi to a big contract, pretty much letting you know right away where their priorities are at. Like, Ryan Poles talking about how he's going to want to be patient in the offseason, yet he goes out in the first day of free agency and tries to overpay for a mid-level defensive tackle. You know what I mean? Obviously, that didn't fall through. That did fall through, obviously, because of medical concerns with Ogunjobi. I hope that he can get a contract somewhere else. It seems like his market's kind of been slow through this offseason so far. But, and again, you look at most of the money that's been spent this offseason, it has been on getting guys on defense for Eberflus and his scheme here. Like, it doesn't seem like the offense has been paid a ton of attention here. They really haven't added a ton of bodies here. They haven't done a lot to change things up to the personnel grouping. And it's just frustrating because I really felt like Ryan Poles would come into this offseason and really make that a point of emphasis of, look at the trends of where the NFL is going over the last few years. It's not great defenses that are driving these teams that are contending year after year after year. It's these teams that develop great offenses. So I would have been totally fine if the Bears came in with the approach this year of, let's just put defense on the shelf for like a year or two and recognize that until we get an offense that is like top 10 of the league year after year after year, it really doesn't matter what you do on defense until then. Because if you have a great defense, but your offense is still bottom 5 in the league, like you're not winning anything, at least nothing of substance. So it's again, I go back to these first two picks, and I get where they're coming from in terms of these are good players here, and they got them at appropriate values for, I think, where they should have gone. The Felix Jones pick, though, makes absolutely no sense. It screams of, they were desperate for a wide receiver because they didn't take one in the second round, and they just reached for a guy that the offensive coordinator liked, and they saw his 4.3 speed and said, okay, I guess that works for us. And that's just kind of the feeling that I'm getting from this this day 2 as a whole for me.
Yeah, I would say this. I mean, it's been a really underwhelming but also polarizing day 2 for the Chicago Bears franchise. And I mean, again, it's about 11:48 here on the East Coast. It's 10:48 Central Time. So we're still seeing a lot of these grades for the 2022 draft come in, and you know, like the guys you had mentioned, like Danny Gray went off the board just as we were started to record this.
Oh,
But I
did
also
he?
think, yeah, he went to San Francisco with the final pick of the
Oh,
third round. But you know,
good
look,
pick for them.
yeah, the point, and that's what great coaching staffs do, is that great coaching staffs, great front offices, they identify that late round talent. Okay. So as much as Bears fans want to kind of crap on Kyle Shanahan for, well, his playoff record, his playoff finishes, I mean, one thing you have to give the 49ers credit for is this is they can identify mid-round talent, and Kyle Shanahan has always had really well coached teams, irrespective of the QB position. But getting back to the live stream here, I mean, for the Bears on day 3, just a quick preview of what to expect. I think, Ryan Poles is gonna look really bad. Well, first things first, he already looked bad in free agency with the whole Larry Ogunjobi fiasco, because that was a player that he threw money at. It's not like Ogunjobi said, "Oh, I'm gonna sign with the Bears." No, Poles and Eberflus collectively, as a general manager and head coach combo, made the decision to throw money at Larry Ogunjobi. Okay, and then that didn't work, and you went with basically a fallback plan in Justin Jones, who again, Poles and Eberflus are going to look really stupid if Justin Jones has a big year in 2022 and has production similar to what Ogunjobi put up in 2021. But that's not the point. The point is the fact that, you know, the Bears only signed one real starting caliber offensive lineman in free agency, and Ryan Poles is going to look really bad if the Bears leave, because they have 3 day 3 picks, right? They've got 2 5ths and a 6th rounder for now, but Poles is going to look terrible if the Bears don't add any offensive linemen. I mean, you look at players like an Abraham Lucas. He was on the board when the Bears selected the esteemed Felix Jones Jr. You look at the Packers, I believe it was at 94th overall that they selected offensive tackle Sean Ryan, who again played OT at UCLA, but at the next level, being about 6'4", 6'5", 312 pounds, he doesn't have the longest arms. He just makes more sense as a guard. So, and then I believe Denarian Kinnard went off the board tonight too. So the point I'm making is that there was a lot of good offensive line talent to be had, but the Jaquan Brisker pick pretty much set the tone for everything. Because, like I said, the first pick, you totally understand why it was made. There's a serious justification. Why the Bears drafted a safety and then kind of compounded their mistake by drafting a 5th round wide receiver. You know what? It is going to be something that is a big question mark. And if anything, those are some selections that are going to determine kind of what is going on. But our publisher at Bear Report, Zach Pearson, tweeted this. He said, "The Bears really love Felix Jones Jr.'s versatility. Said it's a pain for opposing defenses to game plan for those types of players."
Yeah, well, Felix Jones, I mean, he has a really good yak threat. So, I mean, he has that ability which the Bears haven't really had the past couple of years because, they've been a very stagnant offense where it's that Matt Nagy special of, just hitch and curl teams to death and, hope that they don't figure out that you're just running hitches and curls every single play, basically. Like, that's not what we're going to be seeing here with Luke Getsy, which I'm very thankful to see. But I mean, yeah, Felix Jones is a nice fit, I think, for that what they want to do in terms of getting the ball into their hands, their playmakers early on, getting a lot of movement plays in terms of deep crossing routes, shallow crosses, deep posts. I don't think Felix Jones is going to be this deep threat because that was never his game at Tennessee. He was always he was always better as a yak guy. So I don't expect that to be the case here. But I mean, it doesn't change the fact that it's still a massive reach there in the 3rd round. Like 25-year-old wide receiver who relies primarily on straight line speed in the 3rd round, who isn't a great route runner, like isn't really polished. I mean, oh boy. I mean, and it just and the frustrating thing there is that I was actually really excited to see what Ryan Poles would do with the offensive line this offseason because him being an offensive line guy, he brought in Ian Cunningham from the Eagles, who's an offensive line guy. Like I thought they would really make that a point of emphasis in this offseason. They really haven't at all. It's kind of weird because they talked about that a lot in their first couple of press conferences, how they wanted to get lighter and more athletic on the offensive line, how they wanted to reshape this unit, and how what the offensive line looked like last season just didn't sit right with Ryan Poles. And I mean, other than letting James Daniels go, and obviously Jason Peters wasn't going to be coming back, obviously because he's old, and obviously letting Jermaine Ifedi go. I mean, what have they really done to address the offensive line here? They haven't done anything. So, I was expecting them to. I was really thinking they were going to go after Bernard Ryman. I felt like he was going to be a perfect scheme fit for them. What they wanted to do in that outside zone, Shanahan style of offense. Dylan Parham went today in the third round as well. So he went to the 90th pick to the Raiders, I believe. Like Dylan Parham would have been a great fit. I would have taken him at 71 easily over Felix Jones Jr. because he can play center or guard for them. And he's just really athletic, pretty strong at the point of attack. I'm still very sad that my guy Cole Strange got picked by the Patriots in the first round because that would have been the guy I was going to be pounding the table for in the second round there. But yeah, it was just I really thought they would make offensive line a priority. I'm also disappointed that we didn't see any trade downs from Ryan Poles because now we have this giant gap now between 71 and 148 where the Bears aren't going to be picking at all. And there's a lot of talent that's going to be leaving the board here. You look at guys like Zach Tom on Wake Forest, like he could have been an offensive lineman they could have targeted. Again, it kind of fits that mold of that athletic interior offensive lineman. He played tackle in college, but he's probably a guard at the next level. He's available right now. Again, Calvin Austin, he's on the board, I think, as well. Like I think he's a dynamic player that I think would have been much better than Felix Jones. If they want to get that 3-tech, Perrin Winfrey still on the board. Not a guy I'm a huge fan of, but I know Eberflus loves his 3-tech. Chigozie Okonkwo, I think he's probably going to be off the board by the time they get to 158. Charlie Kohler's probably going to be off the board by 158. I mean, those are some really talented players still that could be drafted by the Bears here. And because they don't have any picks, because they didn't trade down and they felt like they were fine sticking there. And it's weird because I know it was mentioned here in the chat here that Poles must not have felt good about the deals he was getting, which I want to address that because, it's possible that he may not have felt good about the deals he was seeing there. But I have a hard time seeing that because you look at the activity. Yeah, there it is right there. You look at the activity here in this draft in general, like this has been a very trade-happy draft, I felt like, especially compared to most years. And yeah, I mean, you need to have a partner, but I felt like they could have had a partner here because there's been trades like everywhere in this draft. So it's hard to believe that there weren't teams calling them up, telling them like, asking them, to make a deal here or trying to get a deal done here. It doesn't make sense here because we've seen trades at like it pretty much like literally every other pick in this draft. I'm not saying that isn't the case. It seems highly unlikely to me. And it's just possible that they just really like the players they wanted to get here, like especially at 71. I don't know. In the second round, I felt like they could have really traded down there, and they just didn't. But that's my view of things because there are just so many teams have been so aggressive trading up in this draft that it just doesn't seem right to me. So, I mean, I would have loved to see them do that. But other than that, man, I mean, these picks are just very odd, in my opinion.
Yeah, and right now, we've got our own publisher, Zach, who's at Hallis Hall. Brian Poles is speaking right now. I don't know why that press conference is not televised, but Poles just made an intriguing comment. He said, we can't fix everything in 1 year, but we sure can just keep chipping away. And look, the reason that I want to bring this comment up is one, because I think it's incredibly generic. Number two, no one's asking you to fix things in a year and go ahead and turn the Bears around, make them Super Bowl contenders. But I think that what you can do is make a couple moves to kind of get yourself closer to speeding up the process of at least being competitive. And, as we begin to wrap this live stream up here, because we're approaching about 40 minutes, is that the Bears certainly they did that in some cases, but then they did not do that in other cases. Like I was of the opinion that, hey, as soon as Christian Watson kind of fell, I thought the Bears should have been on the phone, at least trying to trade up to possibly look into grabbing Christian Watson. So this is something I think you just overall look at and say, okay, the Bears did something today, but at the end of the day, did they really do enough? to warrant kind of being able to at least be semi-competitive in 2022, because we know this team's not going to compete seriously, but what this team can do is at least play good physical hard-nosed football and at least give fans something to watch out for, and just continue to watch and see the progression from week to week. And like Eric Martin here says, in order to trade, you have to have a trade partner. Okay, that's cool and all, but then also at the end of the day, guess what? It's like you mentioned, Andrew. There was so much activity going on left and right, especially at the top of the second round, that there's almost always going to be a team that's willing to move up or move down. But I think what happened in the Bears context is that Ryan Poles didn't like the value that he was getting on the return for some of those picks. And so as a result, he was just like, hey, listen, let's stand pat. And I think that for the Bears, it would have made more sense at 48 to trade back, even if it meant, getting an additional third round pick, not even having a fourth round pick, just getting, two twos, obviously a high two and a low two with your trade back, a third, and then another third, and nothing in the fourth, and then 2/5 and a sixth. That realistically would have made sense for the Bears. But we're going into day 3 here. Bears are going to be picking at 148 and 150 overall, and then 206 in the 6th round. And then bearing any trades, that should absolutely do it, because Ryan Poles just admitted it's hard to see the Bears trading up into round 4.
Well, I mean, I'll say this. I think the Bears did take a step forward in terms of being competitive. But did they take a step forward in terms of being meaningfully competitive? And here's the difference, because I think they made the defense a lot better in this draft by filling out this secondary. Like, I feel very confident that Gordon and Brisker are going to be good players for them. I feel pretty good about that. But here's the thing, though. If you improve your defense, right, you still have, Quinn here for now. I don't know if he's going to get traded. But obviously you feel good with the development of Travis Gibson. You bring in Al-Quadin Muhammad. You bring in Justin Jones. You bring in some guys on defense, that you feel pretty good about. You got Roquan Smith there in the middle. So you got some guys there on defense, and you fill out the secondary, which I think, as we're starting to see in the NFL, you need to have good secondary play if you want to have a good defense. It's not just about the pass rush anymore, so you need to have guys in the secondary. Now they have some guys in the secondary, so they should be, theoretically on paper here, a lot better on that side of the ball this year, even with the trade of Khalil Mack, because I get it. I mean, no Khalil Mack, but he's no longer here this year. But he didn't play a ton last year either because he was injured, and they were still about middle of the pack statistically for the most part. I mean, I know some of that's kind of fluff and stuff because they had some, outlier performances late in the year. I'm looking at that Giants game where Mike Glennon was the quarterback, and they literally the Giants passing game is so pathetic. They couldn't do anything in the passing game. Like, that totally made them look a little bit better than what they actually were in the rankings for sure. But again, you're getting your defense better. That's fine. But if your defense, again, I say it again, if your defense is good, but your offense is still really bad, like, I'm sorry, I don't care about good defense anymore. Like, I've been seeing good for every year that I've been alive. I'm 24 years old. Every year that I've been alive, it seems like the Bears, other than the Trestman years, have had really good defenses, and it has resulted in nothing because their offenses are always near the bottom of the rankings every single year. Like, they can't score points, and in today's NFL especially, you need to score points. So I'm not saying, again, it goes back to that Ryan Poles quote. He's saying, well, we're not going to fix everything in one offseason. Okay, that's great. I'm not asking you to fix everything in this one offseason. I recognize that, some positions are just not going to be fixed this offseason. I get it. So if there are going to be positions that are not going to be fixed this offseason, why not just punt on defense, which is not really all that important right now in terms of your long-term outlook of things, and instead fill your resources on offense, where that is the more important offensive side of the ball. It's extremely important for your young quarterback who needs some support, because you look at Justin Fields, he was one of the most O-line dependent quarterbacks in the league last year. Like, when you look at his production in a clean pocket compared to in a muddy pocket or when under pressure, like, it is like completely night and day. Like, Justin Fields is a good quarterback when he's kept clean. When he is not kept clean, the results are not pretty. And he was not kept clean often last year, which is why the results were not very good last year, and your offensive line just got worse this offseason. So I'm just, again, I'm not asking Ryan Poles to be a miracle worker here. He doesn't have to fix this thing in one offseason. And again, while I'm down on this draft, we shouldn't be judging Ryan Poles on his status as the Bears GM solely off of one draft or one offseason. Like, I'm fine being patient in terms of letting this thing play out, because next year they're going to have a lot more resources to play with. They should be able to be more aggressive in free agency. They should be able to make more moves in the draft. But it just feels like they're setting themselves up this next year to be more competitive, sure, but it's kind of going to be like those John Fox years early on where they had that 5-11 a year. I think it wasn't that 6-10 year. I think they were 6-10 in 2015, and then 5-11 I think in 2017. But those type of years are the years where I would like to avoid. Like, if you're doing great on offense in those years, certainly you want to see that. But if it's one of those things where they're taking strides on defense and they're winning games because of their defense, and their offense is still shitty, and they're taking themselves out of consideration for a top 10 pick again because they're winning just enough because of their defense, like, then you're not actually helping yourself out, I don't think, because now you don't have a premium pick in the next year's draft to be able to trade down or get an elite player at the top of the draft, and you're just going in circles here. I mean, and unless Justin Fields proves to be that guy, which I think he still can, but he's got an uphill path because of the surrounding crappy situation he's in with the talent around him. That's the quickest way for them to improve, obviously. But you need to help him out still, man. I mean, it's still like quarterback, you need to have him. Even if Justin Fields is like a top 10 quarterback next year, you got to give him some help, man. I mean, come on. This offensive depth chart is just pathetic. It's pathetic.
Yeah, it really is. And, this is going to do it from us, guys. Make sure you're following us on Twitter at Usayd Koshul, at AJ Freeman25. Keep it locked in on all the social media accounts. That's Facebook at Bear Report Scouts, Twitter at Bear Report, and at Picks for Polls. We're going to be tweeting all about the draft tomorrow, too. Sunday's the day we should be hopping on to do an instant reactions podcast with our publisher, Zach Pearson, just kind of breaking down the 2022 draft in general, as well as Bears instant reactions, giving an update on how the draft class as a whole graded out. I would say, based off these first 3 picks, it's not going to be super encouraging, but anything can happen, and the Bears could certainly change that with the 3 picks that they have tomorrow. But until then, guys, bear down, have a great night, and we will see you guys later. Enjoy the rest of the draft, by the way.